The auction in the square. The sun, a molten eye in the noonday sky, glared down on Oakhaven Square, turning the cobblestones into a griddle and the air into a suffocating blanket. Thomas Ashton, usually lost in the pleasant chaos of market day, felt a cold premonition coil in his gut. The familiar din of vendors and haggling had shrunk to a muted hum, replaced by an unsettling stillness. A rickety platform stood starkly in the square's center, where a thin, anxious man wrung his hands, a picture of misery. Curiosity overriding his apprehension, Thomas shouldered through the throng. He'd caught snippets of conversation about misfortune and spiraling debt, but hadn't envisioned such dire straits. Perched on the platform like caged birds were three young women, their faces ashen and their spirits low. Clad in plain-spun dresses, their gazes were fixed on the dusty boards beneath their feet. The oldest, barely past girlhood, possessed a stubborn set to her jaw, yet couldn't conceal the tremor that vibrated through her. The youngest, scarcely more than a child at 15, clung to her siblings, her frail form racked with silent tears. The gaunt man rasped, his voice a dry leaf skittering across the square. "Good folk of Oakhaven," he began, his words barely carrying above the murmur. I stand before you humbled by circumstance. As you well know, calamity has struck my home. The blight devoured our harvest, and the lenders, their hearts are stone." He paused, his eyes darting among the assembled faces, begging for leniency. "I am left with no recourse. To salvage what remains of our livelihood, to secure shelter, I must offer my daughter's services." A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Nausea churned in Thomas's stomach. Services? This was no employment opportunity. It was a transaction of desperation. He balled his fists, his pulse quickening. He'd heard tales of such callous acts in grander settlements, never imagining it could infect Oakhaven. Undeterred, the father continued, his voice imbued with a feverish strength born of despair. "My daughters possess resilience, diligence, and talent. Alara, the eldest, is adept with needle and thread, and possesses a farmer's understanding of the land. Lyra, the middle, is a superb cook with a gentle nature around animals. And young Clara, though tender in years, she learns swiftly and is eager to please." His gaze lingered on his daughters, a tempest of love and torment in his eyes. "I vouch for their character. Any household would be blessed to welcome them." A thick-set man, his beard glistening with grease, stepped forward, his gaze lingering on Alara with unsettling focus. "What aptitude does the eldest possess with figures? Can she manage ledgers?" The father stammered. She understands basic sums." The man grunted, stroking his chin. "I'll commence the bidding at 5 shillings. 5 shillings? Incandescent anger surged through Thomas. A pittance for a young woman's future. Other bids followed, tentative at first, then emboldened by the whiff of opportunity that now permeated the square. 7 shillings. 10. 12. Each offer landed like a physical blow on Thomas. He studied the sisters, their expressions a painful blend of shame and resignation. Alara enfolded her sisters closer, her eyes flashing with fierce protectiveness. He glanced at his own hands, calloused but capable. He inherited his father's carpentry tools and a modest but comfortable house. He possessed enough to care for them, enough to offer a different path. This wasn't his design. He hadn't contemplated matrimony. Yet gazing at those girls, witnessing the hopelessness etched on their faces, he knew inaction wasn't an option. 15 shillings, he declared, the words resonating in the sudden void of sound. Every eye converged on him. Thomas Ashton, the taciturn carpenter, the bachelor more at ease with timber than with women. Heat flooded his cheeks beneath the weight of their stares. The stout man with the greasy beard scoffed. "Ashton, what use would you have for 3 women? You can barely look after yourself." Thomas ignored him, his gaze locked on the sisters. Alara met his eyes, her own widening with surprise, a spark of hope igniting within them. The auctioneer, a man of considerable girth and a booming voice, seized the moment. 15 shillings bid for 3 spirited young women. Do I hear 16? Thomas swallowed, his heart hammering. This was lunacy, absolute lunacy, but retreat was impossible. Not with the brittle hope shining in their eyes. He drew a breath and raised his voice again. 20 shillings! A debt paid in kindness. A collective intake of breath swept through the assembled crowd as the gavel descended. Sold, to Mr. Thomas Ashton, for £150. Usually lost in the throng, Thomas felt 100 pairs of eyes burning into him. Acting on a whim, driven by a sudden swell of protectiveness as Alara's price climbed, he'd made the bid. The sum represented a crippling chunk of his savings, money intended for a future now rendered meaningless. He stood rooted, his sawdust-dusted apron a flimsy shield against their communal scrutiny. A low buzz of speculation erupted. Ashton? The carpenter. What does he intend to do with them? He can't possibly keep them. He cleared his throat, the rasp amplified in the ensuing hush. I intend to give them sanctuary, he managed, the words sounding weak, almost absurd. The auctioneer, a man accustomed to swift deals and easy profits, appeared genuinely bewildered. He flicked a hand dismissively towards the sisters, huddled together, their faces wan with terror. Mr. Ashton, your acquisitions, shall we say, await. Thomas approached with caution. Alara, the eldest, met his gaze, a fragile blend of suspicion and yearning etched on her features. Lyra, the middle child, clung to her, her knuckles bone white. Anya, the youngest, stared fixedly at the dirt, lost in some inner world. Ladies, Thomas began, his voice roughened with sincerity. I know this is highly unusual, but I assure you my motives are pure. I offer you shelter, sustenance, and safety. Nothing more. Alara's eyes bored into his, searching for any flicker of deceit. Why? She breathed, her voice barely audible. Why would you do this? Thomas faltered. How could he convey the deep-seated revulsion he felt at their commodification? How to articulate the simple human impulse that drove him? Because it's right, he stated finally, the words carrying quiet resolve. Because nobody deserves to be treated as property. He indicated the exit. My home is not opulent, but it's sturdy. It's a considerable walk. Are you able? Alara assisted Anya to her feet. Lyra trailed behind, her eyes flicking nervously around the square. They moved like phantoms, their steps slow, their threadbare dresses clinging to them like shadows. The journey to Thomas's cottage was a silent procession. The sisters followed a few paces behind, their footsteps muted on the parched earth. The sinking sun cast elongated, gaunt shadows, deepening the melancholy of the landscape. Thomas occasionally glanced back, his heart stung by their weary acquiescence. The air tasted of wood smoke and wet soil. At long last, they reached a small, whitewashed cottage nestled against the embrace of the woods. A plume of smoke spiraled from the chimney, a promise of warmth within. The garden, though wild, hinted at a forgotten loveliness, with vestiges of roses climbing the time-worn walls. Thomas eased open the wooden gate, its hinges screeching a rusty lament. Welcome, he said, his voice threaded with nervous earnestness. It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it. He held the door ajar, waiting for them to cross the threshold, to emerge from the gloaming and into the tentative security of his humble dwelling. The sisters hesitated. Then, one by one, they stepped inside. The day's burden, the auction, their former existence, lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. Thomas watched them. His heart swelled with a delicate hope that he had made the correct choice, that he could somehow gift them a fresh start, a life unshackled from the past. Welcome home. The wagon rattled to a stop. Instead of the oppressive gates and stone walls Alara had braced herself for, she saw a small, tidy cottage with smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. A riot of late-blooming wildflowers spilled over the edges of a carefully tended garden. It was peaceful. Thomas hopped down and reached up to help Anya. Then Lyra. Alara, still stiff and sore, managed on her own. As her feet hit the packed earth, a man emerged from the cottage. Older than Thomas, but with the same kind eyes and easy smile. He had lines etched deep around his mouth that spoke of laughter and hardship in equal measure. "Father, these are Alara, Lyra, and Anya," Thomas said, his voice unusually formal. "Sisters. I bought them at auction today." The man's smile didn't falter. He stepped forward, offering a hand each to Anya and Lyra, his touch light. "Welcome home, girls. I'm Daniel, Thomas's father." He turned to Alara, his gaze assessing, but gentle. "And you must be Alara." He inclined his head. "A pleasure to meet you all." Come in. "You must be tired and hungry." Inside, the cottage was small but immaculate. The air smelled of wood smoke and baking bread. Two younger men, both with the same dark hair and strong builds as Thomas, were setting a rough-hewn table. They paused, staring. "Samuel, Finn," Thomas said, a touch of exasperation in his voice. "These are Alara, Lyra, and Anya. My brothers, Samuel and Finn." Samuel, the taller of the two, recovered first. He offered a hesitant smile. "Welcome," he mumbled, his cheeks flushing. Finn remained silent, his gaze fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made Alara bristle. Daniel cleared his throat. "Right then, let's get some food into you all. You can tell us your story later if you're willing." The meal was simple, thick slices of bread, a hearty stew, and mugs of something warm and sweet that Alara suspected was watered-down honey. But after days of anxiety and meager rations, it tasted like a feast. Thomas sat beside Anya, quietly encouraging her to eat. Lyra, still skittish, stayed close to Alara. Finn kept glancing her way, making Lyra shrink further into herself. Samuel, seemingly oblivious, ate with gusto and offered shy smiles to anyone who caught his eye. Alara observed the family. Daniel, the quiet patriarch, exuded a sense of calm wisdom. Samuel seemed earnest and kind, if a bit awkward. Finn, however, was an enigma. There was a restlessness in his eyes, a barely suppressed energy that made Alara uneasy. After the meal, Daniel led them to a small room at the back of the cottage. It contained 3 narrow beds, neatly made with patchwork quilts. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours. You can rest here. We'll talk more in the morning." As soon as the door closed behind him, Lyra burst into tears. "I don't like him," she sobbed, burying her face in Alara's shoulder. "Finn. He keeps looking at me." Anya, ever practical, patted Lyra's back. "He's just curious, I think. He hasn't seen anyone new in a while." Alara wasn't so sure. There was something predatory in Finn's gaze that she didn't like at all. She held Lyra close, trying to reassure her. "We'll be all right," she said, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "We're together. And Thomas, he seems like a good man." She glanced around the small room. It was sparsely furnished, but clean and safe, a far cry from the auction block. Despite her apprehension, Alara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had found a sanctuary, a place where they could finally breathe. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had entered a new kind of cage, one built not of iron bars, but of expectations and unspoken obligations. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that survival would require more than just gratitude. Finding their place. The aroma wafting from the kitchen was enough to draw even Thomas from his workshop. He'd been planing a particularly knotty piece of oak, his brow furrowed in concentration, but the scent of roasting herbs and simmering broth was an irresistible siren call. He found Alara humming softly as she stirred a large pot over the fire. "Something smells wonderful," he said, leaning against the doorway. Alara smiled, her cheeks flushed from the heat. "Just a simple stew, sir. I noticed you had some root vegetables and a bit of dried venison. I hope it's to your liking." Thomas chuckled. "After the gruel I usually make, Anything will be an improvement. Call me Thomas, please. Sir makes me feel older than I am. Later, gathered around the rough-hewn table, the family ate with a gusto Thomas hadn't seen in years. Even Silas, normally a picky eater, cleaned his plate. The stew was rich and flavorful, the venison tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked. Lyra, who had been quiet since their arrival, offered Alara a shy smile. "It's very good," she whispered. The next morning, Thomas found Isla in the small sitting room, her nimble fingers flying across a piece of fabric. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the intricate stitches she was making. He'd noticed a pile of his son's worn shirts earlier, destined for the rag bin. Now one was spread across Isla's lap, transformed. What had been a tear was now adorned with a delicate embroidered patch of interwoven leaves and berries. "That's remarkable," Thomas said, genuinely impressed. He hadn't realized the extent of their talents. Isla looked up, startled. I hope you don't mind. The shirts were torn, and I thought perhaps they could be mended." She gestured to a small basket overflowing with colorful scraps of fabric. "I can make other things too. Curtains, perhaps? Or cushion covers." Her voice held a hopeful tremor. He saw not just a talent for mending, but a desire to create beauty, to fill the stark house with warmth. "Anything you wish, Isla. Anything at all." That evening, after the dishes were cleared and the lamps lit, Wren settled by the fire, her eyes gleaming in the flickering light. She cleared her throat, a mischievous grin playing on her lips. "I have a story," she announced, "about a knight, a dragon, and a very clever princess." Silas, usually preoccupied with his books, looked up with interest. Even Caleb, who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward slightly. Wren's voice, usually soft, took on a dramatic flair as she wove a tale of daring rescues, magical creatures, and impossible feats. The story unfolded with vivid detail, painting pictures in their minds of enchanted forests and towering castles. She described the dragon's scales shimmering like 1,000 emeralds, the knight's armor gleaming under the moonlight, and the princess's wit as sharp as any sword. Her gestures were animated, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the story. She even did voices, transforming herself into each character with surprising skill. Thomas watched, mesmerized. It wasn't just the story itself, but the way Wren held them all captive with her words. He realized that each of the sisters, in their own way, was bringing something vital to the household, filling the void that had been there for so long. Alara brought nourishment, Isla brought beauty, and Wren brought magic. As Wren's story reached its climax, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. The flames in the fireplace leaped higher, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air crackled with an unseen energy. Wren paused, her eyes wide. "And then," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind, "the dragon awoke." She left the sentence hanging, unfinished, the suspense palpable. Silas gasped. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Thomas felt a prickle of unease on the back of his neck. The wind howled again, louder this time, and for a moment, he could have sworn he heard a low, guttural growl coming from outside. The unfinished story hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities, hinting at a world far beyond the walls of their small cottage. Whispers of affection. Days bled into weeks, the initial awkwardness in the Ashton household slowly dissolving like sugar in hot tea. Samuel, initially reserved and focused on his agricultural projects, found his attention drawn repeatedly to Alara. It wasn't her beauty, though she possessed a quiet grace, but her pragmatism. He'd watched her, hands calloused but deft, tending to the injured animals Wren sometimes brought home, negotiating fair prices with the local merchants for supplies, and calmly mediating disputes between Anya and Isla. One afternoon, a storm had ripped through the barley field, threatening the entire harvest. Samuel, overwhelmed, had been barking orders, only to find Alara already organizing the workers, directing them with a calm assurance that settled his own panic. That night, as they salvaged what they could, she offered him a steaming mug of tea, her eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. "It'll be all right, Samuel," she'd said, her voice soft but firm. "We'll figure it out." He saw not pity, but genuine resolve, and something shifted within him. Finn, on the other hand, was captivated by Isla's restless spirit. Where Alara was grounded, Isla seemed to float, her mind always buzzing with new ideas. She spent hours sketching fantastical creatures in her notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration, or exploring the woods behind the house, returning with pockets full of wildflowers and strange stones. One evening, he found her perched on the roof of the barn, gazing at the stars. He climbed up beside her, careful not to disturb her reverie. "What are you looking at?" he asked, his voice low. "Constellations," she replied, pointing to a cluster of stars. "But I'm trying to imagine what lives out there. Maybe creatures made of stardust, or planets covered in crystal forests." Finn, a practical man of the earth, had never considered such things. He usually only looked to the stars to tell the time. But as Isla described her imagined worlds, he found himself swept up in her enthusiasm, a sense of wonder he hadn't felt since childhood bubbling within him. Meanwhile, a different kind of affection was blossoming under the Ashton sky. Thomas, still reeling from the whirlwind of events, found an unexpected kindred spirit in Wren. They would often sit on the porch after dinner, sharing stories and dreams. Thomas spoke of his desire to build homes, not just houses, but sanctuaries where families could feel safe and loved. Wren, in turn, shared her passion for healing, her dream of establishing a clinic where she could care for the sick and injured, regardless of their ability to pay. One particularly clear night, they lay on a blanket in the meadow, gazing at the Milky Way. "Do you ever feel like you're not living the life you were meant to?" Wren asked, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas sighed. "Every single day. But I'm trying. I'm trying to build something better." Wren turned to him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Me too, Thomas. Me too." He saw in her a reflection of his own hopes and anxieties, a shared understanding that transcended words. He reached out and gently took her hand, a silent promise of support and companionship. The air crackled with an unspoken energy, a connection forged in shared vulnerability and a mutual desire to create a better world. The merchant's offer. The dust hadn't even settled from the auction when a richly adorned carriage pulled up to Thomas's modest cottage. A man stepped out, his silk robes shimmering in the afternoon sun, a gold chain glinting against his ample belly. He reeked of exotic spices and coin. "Thomas Ashton?" he boomed, his voice accustomed to being obeyed. Thomas, still reeling from the morning's events, wiped his hands on his apron. "That's me. I am Silas of the Merchant Guild. I have an offer for you." Silas's gaze flicked towards the cottage, then back to Thomas, a flicker of distaste in his eyes. "Concerning the acquisitions you made this morning." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't told anyone of his intentions, but word traveled fast in these parts. "What kind of offer?" Silas puffed out his chest. "My sons are of marrying age. They require wives. I am prepared to offer you a considerable sum for the hands of those 3 young women." He named a figure, a sum that made Thomas's head spin. Enough to buy new tools, expand his workshop, and secure a comfortable future for himself. A future he hadn't dared dream of just yesterday. He swallowed hard. "They're not for sale." The words felt flimsy, even to his own ears. Silas raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Everything is for sale, Ashton. It's simply a matter of price. Think of the opportunity you'd be giving them. A life of comfort, security. My sons are well provided for." He paused, then added with a sly grin. "And I assure you, they know how to please a woman." Thomas's hands clenched. He imagined Alara's frightened eyes, Lyra's quiet dignity, Anya's fragile hope. He'd promised them sanctuary, a haven from the harsh world that had already treated them so cruelly. Could he, in good conscience, sell them back into servitude, even a gilded one? "I need time to think," he said, his voice hoarse. Of course. I understand. Prudence is a virtue." Silas clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture feeling more like a brand. "I'll be back tomorrow at noon. Be wise, Ashton. Such an offer will not come again." He climbed back into his carriage, the horses' hooves kicking up dust as they departed, leaving Thomas standing alone in the sudden silence. He went inside, the air thick with unspoken anxieties. Alara was tending the small fire, her movements tentative. Lyra was quietly mending a tear in Anya's dress. They stopped when he entered, their eyes searching his face. He forced a smile. "Everything all right here?" "We heard a carriage," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "We heard voices." Thomas sighed. He couldn't lie to them. "That was a merchant. He made me an offer for your hands in marriage." The color drained from Alara's face. Anya started to tremble. Lyra, ever the stoic, simply stared at him, her gaze unwavering. You wouldn't, would you?" Alara stammered, her voice laced with fear. "You wouldn't sell us again?" Thomas felt a surge of anger, directed at Silas, at the world, at himself. "No," he said, his voice firm now. "I gave you my word. I won't break it." But even as he spoke, a seed of doubt lingered. The merchant's offer was a tempting escape from his own precarious existence, a chance to secure his future at the cost of theirs. He looked at the three sisters, their faces etched with worry, and knew that whatever decision he made, it would change all their lives forever. A family's solution. Unspoken anxieties hung thick as wool in the Ashton family's drawing room. Alara perched on the settee's edge, her grip on Isla's hand a desperate anchor. Ren's restless energy propelled her back and forth, her slippers whispering across the obeson. Thomas, under the weight of culpability, watched them. "A merchant made an offer," he mumbled, avoiding their gaze. "From the east. He desires you for—" His voice trailed off. "For what, Thomas?" Ren halted, impatience sharpening her tone. "Ornamental possessions? To be caged and bartered?" Alara's inquiry was barely audible. "Are we commodities again?" Isla answered by squeezing Alara's hand, her focus lost in the carpet's labyrinthine design. Their silent communication spoke volumes. Dashed hopes, shattered dreams. Finn and Samuel, having eavesdropped from the hallway, entered, their faces mirroring the room's tension. Samuel edged closer to Alara, his hand extended in an unspoken offer of solace. Finn mirrored Ren's agitated stance. "Sold? Who dares suggest such a thing?" Finn's tone held a clear edge. Thomas ran a frustrated hand through his hair. Already a mess. A merchant. A very tempting proposal. Before the situation could combust, a voice, accustomed to authority, silenced them. "Enough!" Thomas's father swept in, a patriarch whose very presence commanded deference. Silver hair meticulously groomed, his aged eyes glinted with undiminished sharpness. He motioned for them to be seated. "I've heard enough," he declared, his gaze moving deliberately from face to face. "This predicament demands a resolution born of affection and commitment, not fear and financial expediency." He settled into his worn leather armchair, which sighed in response. "Thomas, your rescue of these ladies was commendable. But true honor resides in guaranteeing their well-being, not treating them as collateral." A pregnant pause hung in the air. "Samuel, your fondness for Alara is clear. Finn, your concern for Isla equally so. Why not solidify these feelings? Marry them." A ripple of surprise washed across the room. Samuel's eyes widened, darting to Alara, who regarded him with incredulous hope. Finn looked at Isla, her expression a perfect echo of Alara's. Ren's gaze remained fixed on Thomas, her thoughts a closed book. "Father, with respect," Thomas stammered. "This is sudden. Perhaps," his father conceded, "but not illogical. You, Thomas, share a bond with Ren, it would seem. If she is willing, you might marry her, too." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken considerations. Samuel was the first to break it, kneeling before Alara and taking her hand. "Alara, He confessed, his voice thick with sincerity. I've been captivated by you since we met. By your resilience, your compassion. I would be deeply honored if you would become my wife. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but a radiant smile bloomed. Samuel, she breathed. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Inspired by Samuel's courage, Finn approached Isla. Isla, he began, his voice unsteady. I've tried to conceal it, but my feelings for you run deep, deeper than I ever imagined. Would you grant me the extraordinary privilege of becoming my wife? Tears streamed down Isla's face, but she nodded vehemently, unable to articulate her joy. Finn grasped her hand, offering a gentle reassurance. Thomas turned towards Ren, her gaze unwavering. Ren? He asked softly, almost a question. Ren studied him intently, her expression unreadable. And what of your own desire, Thomas? She queried. Is this a genuine wish, or simply a solution to a rather tangled problem? 3 hearts, 3 vows. Around the scarred table, a cartographer's spread of ledgers replaced maps of terrain. The merchant's proposition, finally delivered to Thomas, dangled their future like a glittering prize, yet demanded a grim payment, the women's return. The secret had festered, a weight on his conscience. But observing Samuel's focused gaze and Finn's coiled energy, he could no longer shoulder the burden alone. He wants them back, Thomas announced, each syllable leaden. The ensuing quiet was a suffocating blanket. Finn's fist crashed against the wood, the inkwell leaping like a startled creature. Over my dead body. They belong here. Samuel, ever practical, raked fingers through his dark hair. Spill it, Thomas. You have a solution brewing. Thomas slid the parchment, outlining the merchant's terms, across the surface. We deed him the farm. Finn's mouth fell open. Samuel snatched the parchment, his brow knitting as he scanned the details. The entire farm? Our livelihood. It suffices, Thomas countered. To erase the debt, to begin anew where they won't be viewed as chattel. His eyes sought theirs, pleading for solidarity. We vanish before the reaping. Tonight we pledge ourselves. The brothers offered swift consent, and the tension eased from Thomas. He watched Samuel stride purposefully toward the door, determination hardening his features, Finn tailing him, his usual exuberance subdued by a quiet steadfastness. Samuel discovered Alara tending her miniature apothecary, her fingers stained with the green essence of herbs. Kneeling beside her, he captured her hand. Alara, he began, his voice a low rasp, I misled you about the circumstances of your arrival, the agreement. He confessed the emotions he'd stifled, the burgeoning passion. He extolled her fortitude, her insight, the way she'd chased the shadows from their lives. Then, producing a roughly hewn silver ring, a token of his own making, he asked, Alara, will you grant me the profound joy of being my wife? Her eyes widened, brimming with unshed tears. She framed his face with her hands. Samuel, she breathed. I despaired of you ever uttering those words. She surged forward, her kiss a torrent of emotion, tears mingling with his. Meanwhile, Finn located Isla by the murmuring river, engrossed in her sketchbook. Dragonflies danced in the balmy air. He settled beside her, drawn to the warmth radiating from her. Isla, he murmured. Your artistry unveils a world unseen through ordinary eyes. You've opened my vision. He took her hand, his work-worn palm surprisingly gentle. I possess no fortune, no manner to offer, but I pledge my heart, my unwavering protection, a life brimming with laughter and escapades. Will you take my hand in marriage, Isla? Isla gazed at him, her emerald eyes luminous. Finn, she responded, a radiant smile illuminating her face. You captured my heart the instant you recognized my strength. My answer is yes, eternally. She embraced him fiercely, her sketchbook tumbling unnoticed to the earth. Emboldened by his brother's actions, Thomas sought Ren in the kitchen, where she hummed as she coaxed life into dough. The comforting fragrance of yeast permeated the air. He paused, admiring the delicate power of her movements, the quiet resilience she possessed. Stepping forward, he clasped her flower-dusted hands in his. "Ren," he began, his voice betraying a tremor. "Words fail me, but I implore you to understand. To me, you represent more than mere obligation. You are my everything. You are the guiding star of my life, the impetus for my every dawn. I long to forge a life alongside you, a life authentic and rich, filled with affection, joy, and every conceivable good thing." He presented a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "I crafted this for you," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you consent to be my wife, Ren?" Ren gasped, tears welling. She reached out, caressing the carving's delicate wings. "Thomas," she whispered, "I never dared harbor such a dream. Yes, yes, I accept." She enveloped him in her embrace, burying her face against his chest. The aroma of her hair, a blend of lavender and sunshine, filled him completely. Preparations began immediately. The humble farmhouse morphed, echoing with merriment and the sounds of labor. Alara, deploying her botanical wisdom, adorned the barn with garlands of wildflowers. Isla, stirred by the surrounding scenery, covered the walls with murals, rendering the space a vibrant, breathing landscape. Ren, wielding her nimble fingers, fashioned dresses from scraps, creating gowns both beautiful and practical. 3 hearts had found their voices, and 3 destinies would soon be intertwined, happily ever after. The scent of honeysuckle and wood smoke mingled in the air, a fragrant blessing clinging to the joyous chaos. 3 altars, draped in wildflowers and homespun linen, stood bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Thomas watched, a lump forming in his throat, as his sons, Samuel, Peter, and John, stood tall and proud beside the women they had chosen. Eliza, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears, squeezed Samuel's hand. Her simple gown of ivory wool couldn't hide the radiant beauty blooming from within. Beside her, Martha, ever practical, adjusted Peter's collar with a loving smile. Even the usually stoic Sarah, her hand resting lightly on John's arm, seemed to soften under the weight of his gentle gaze. The village elder, his voice a familiar rumble, began the ceremony, his words echoing across the clearing. Thomas listened, his heart overflowing. He'd done what he thought was right, acted from a place of compassion, and it had blossomed into this, a tapestry of love, loyalty, and unexpected happiness. As the vows were exchanged, each a testament to newfound affection and shared dreams, Thomas felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Master Hemlock, the merchant whose caravan often passed through the village. Hemlock, a man whose face was usually etched with shrewd calculation, wore a rare smile. "Thomas," he said, his voice surprisingly warm, "I've been watching your sons, watching these women, and watching you. What you did, it was remarkable." He paused, stroking his neatly trimmed beard. "I need a man I can trust, a man with integrity. I've been thinking of expanding my operations, setting up a permanent trading post here. I need a partner, someone who knows the land, the people, and the value of a fair deal. Someone like you." Thomas was stunned. A partnership with Master Hemlock? It was an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say yes," Hemlock chuckled. "Think about it, of course. But know that I wouldn't offer this to just anyone. I see something in you, Thomas, something rare." The ceremony concluded with 3 resounding "I do's," followed by a wave of cheers and applause. The air filled with music and laughter as the celebration began. Thomas watched his sons dance with their wives, their faces alight with joy. He knew in that moment that he would accept Hemlock's offer, not for himself but for them, to secure their future, to provide them with opportunities he never had. Years spun by, woven with the threads of hard work, shared laughter, and unwavering loyalty. The trading post flourished under Thomas's steady hand, bringing prosperity to the village and beyond. Samuel became a skilled craftsman, his workshop filled with intricate carvings that were traded far and wide. Peter, with Martha by his side, managed the farm, their fields overflowing with bounty. And John, inspired by Sarah's quiet strength, became the village healer, tending to the sick and injured with compassion and care. Children filled the Ashton household, their small hands clutching wildflowers, their voices echoing with the joyful sounds of family. Thomas, surrounded by his sons, their wives, and his grandchildren, often sat by the fire, a contented smile gracing his lips. He would look at the portraits hanging on the wall, portraits of Eliza, Martha, and Sarah, their eyes filled with gratitude and love. He knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. He had given them a home, a family, and a future, and in doing so, he had found his own happily ever after.